Hello everyone! I'm Jin and I'm a full-time mom and property investor in the UK. It's been a busy time of the year with Chinese New Year to catch up with friends and families. And a question that I commonly get when I tell people that I'm investing in properties in the UK is what actually is happening in the UK property market and are the prices good? So I put together this little video to share with you a little bit about the housing prices patterns in the UK. Right, so let's start with this chart. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with property investment in general, I'd like to show you this chart to show you how property value actually increases over time. Now, if you can see at the top of the chart, this house was actually bought for £10,000 in 1964, and over 50 years, it increased in value up to £650,000. So some of you might be thinking, is that right? Wow, that's a huge increase. Well, that's what property does. It increases in value over time. Now, what you have to realize is that it doesn't grow all the time, and neither does it sort of crash all the time. If we look at this chart, you can see that across a number of periods where different UK prime ministers have been in office, can see that the housing price growth rates have actually fluctuated over different periods of time. So we start with Harold Wilson in the 1960s, where property price growth was at a range of about 6%. And then after that, it went up in the early 70s to about 24%. And by the time Harold Wilson came back to office, property prices growth rate was back at 7%, but then it was followed by 11 years of an average growth rate of 12% when Margaret Thatcher was in office. In general, looking at the data, you can expect about 6 to 8 years of relatively flat growth periods, and then 8 to 10 years of relatively high growth periods. Now, the next question that most people have in their mind, or probably not a question, but their impression of the UK housing market, is that the South has higher growth than the North. When we look at the data, you can actually see that in 1980s to 1990s, the North and South actually grew more than 100% in property prices. But in the decade that followed, and this is probably where a lot of the impression came from, the south of England actually grew at 46%, while the north of England only grew at 19%. Then, if we look at the decade after, which is the 2000s to 2010, can see that north of England actually grew by 102%, while the south of England only grew 75%. So looking across the entire period of 27 years, the north of England actually grew 5 times, south of England grew 5.5 times. So over time, north and south actually grow the same, just not at the same time. So in this chart, you can see the white line represents the actual housing prices that have been increasing since the 1960s all the way to the 2000s. And the black line shows the percentage change of those housing prices year on year. So in the early 70s, you can see that there was a definite sort of peak there. A lot of people actually remember the early 70s as when a crash happened and interest rates were really high at about. So some people would get quite worried about higher interest rates, and it's definitely not fun to be a landlord with high interest rates, especially on your mortgage. But if you can understand and get a feel of the housing market, it's a little bit less scary because you would have anticipated and started working with world-class experts to get a fixed loan of maybe 2 years to 5 years on a fixed interest, and then interest rates goes up. You are able to ride your way through it while other people feel the pain. And at the same time, the property that you have is now skyrocketing through the roof in its value. Just looking at this early 70s, for example, in 1 year it increased by 33%, and in the second year it increased by 36% in value. So compounded over 2 years, your property would have increased in value by 75%. So the red line in this chart is the same as the white line in the previous chart, where it actually shows the actual housing prices increased over time from the 1960s to the 2000s. And the blue line shows the housing price if we have modeled it at a very conservative growth rate of 5% a year. So as you can see here, even at a very conservative growth rate of 5%, the housing value would have increased 7 times in a period of 15 years. So I'm very confident to model at a 5% growth rate. Often when I get to this point on the conversation with people, the next thing that comes to mind was that, hey, I heard in the news that, housing prices in London have crashed, or housing prices in London are booming, so we should get in now. Now, I like to point out that the housing market in London is not exactly representative for the whole housing market in the UK. In fact, we can see that housing prices actually follow a certain pattern across regions using past data. When housing prices start to increase, they usually start increasing in Greater London. And then it slowly washes out into the outer metropolitan area, and then the southwest, then the southeast, and then East Anglia, all of which surround London. Then about 2 years later, which is 3 years since the prices in London started going up, it would have reached the Midlands, and prices in the Midlands would start going up. Then about a year later, which is 4 years now since London prices have increased, it would reach the M62 corridor. This is where Leeds, Liverpool, Hull, Sheffield, Yorkshire, these areas would start having their house prices increase. Now Manchester is a little bit special because of its unique characteristics, and it will probably only take about 2.5 years since London prices increase before prices in Manchester also go up. Now moving further up north into the northeast and then the northwest, that would probably take 5 years. At the same time, if prices begin to fall or crash in the London market, it will probably take another 5 years before it reaches the northeast of England, such as cities in Newcastle. But I don't have a crystal ball, and this is not an exact science. So we're only looking at general patterns. So I can't guarantee that this will exactly happen, but it's important that you get a feel of the market and start working with world-class experts in order to make the most of the situation. So that's all I would like to share with you today in this video. I hope you found it helpful and interesting to understand the UK housing market. If you are interested in investing in property, I specialize in family-led properties in the northeast of England. And I'm looking for investors with £80,000 who would like great returns on their money and all the work done for them to team up with in order to build a world-class property portfolio together. Thank you again for joining me in this video, and I hope to see you soon. Bye!